did a middle-class diet really look like in the 1960s? Just stale bread and rice pudding? The truth is a bit more extreme, and today I'm going to show you all the best foods that people ate on a tight budget. So we're going to start off small and with some lightweight hitters. Stuffed pork loin, for example, wasn't exactly what you would call super expensive. Pork back in those times averaged around 39 to 59 cents a pound, and that was the going rate in most grocery stores. Your basic pork chops were your everyday options for beef-related nutrition. Stuffed pork loin was naturally a bit more popular, especially in places like Tennessee, Kentucky, and North Carolina. People would throw in their own spins on this, such as including cornbread, sausages, or more. You could go upstate to New York or Pennsylvania and find the same, but this time you'd find a amore European-centric version of the dish. The typical seasonings across all regions were stuff like sage, thyme, and rosemary, so it tasted very herbal. Pork was something people relied on due to it being decently cheaper than beef and also being widely accessible, but that's what made it a status symbol. If people saw you shopping for pork, then they knew you had a budget that couldn't make any room for some real beef. Still, there's a massive difference between beef, pork, and frog legs, which despite being only 25 to 40 cents and in some areas completely free if you caught them yourselves, were very unnerving meals. I mean, I think I speak for a lot of us when I say that there is a line in the sand we all draw somewhere, and frog legs are definitely crossing it. It was popular in places like Mississippi, Louisiana, and Arkansas, especially because of influences from Cajun cuisine and Creole cooking techniques. In the Midwest, though, they'd take a pretty extra spin on this. Personally, I think frying frog legs in beer batter is taking it a few steps too far, but whatever works for you. This was a dead giveaway that you were middle class, though. Despite how it was only served rarely in homes, even the ones that had a taste for it, despite how it was even featured in restaurant menus, it was always something people saw as a dish you had to settle for to eat. It wasn't as common as your other meat alternatives, and it was nowhere near as popular or as varied either. Baked ziti couldn't land further on the opposite side of the spectrum. So far, this is our most expensive item yet. The cheese for this bad boy would run you around 50 to 70 cents easily, and that was a price you could expect in most markets and grocery stores. The canned tomato sauce was the cheapest, since it would basically just be for $12 or $14, and the pasta itself was around $15. Naturally, in places with a heavy concentration of Italian-American populations across the suburbs and neighborhoods, this dish was a regular hit. Northeast, you had Connecticut and New York making new strides with how well Americans understood pasta. In the Midwest, traditional forms of authentic Italian dishes and recipes were being preserved by immigrants that had a knack for tradition. This rich and cheesy dish might taste just a bit different depending on where you find yourself landing, but it's something worth trying in whatever area of the United States you find yourself in. The pasta and tomato sauce were cheap, and since it was cheesy, it didn't have a lot going on. People saw it as a dish that was okay for your casual lunch or dinner, especially on a budget. Let's try to keep it moving. Now, you've heard me repeat how lamb and beef were a lot more expensive than pork, and that's doubly true for lamb chops. These actually are the first item here we have, besides maybe a very flashy version of baked ziti, that crosses $1, totaling for around $1.29. These chops were not the same price as your knockout cuts of steak that would get all the rich folks spreading their wallets and purses, but it would still get a lot of traction. See, in the 60s, American culture was in a cocoon-like phase. It was changing, crumbling, adapting, and being inspired by all the different communities that existed in the country. By all accounts, it had become a melting pot. A pot where flavors and ideas of the entire world came together to stew, simmer, and eventually become something wildly different. How does this tie back into lamb chops? Depending on the area you were in or the community, you could have pork chops that were done in the style of Greek cuisine or Scandinavian cuisine, or even Eastern European takes on lambs. Some people would season it with garlic, whereas others would go for things like rosemary or mint. People would broil their chops, pan-sear them, and even grill and roast them. Like I said, it was a melting pot, and you had at least 10 different ways of trying lamb chops before you could say you had seen it all. Speaking of influences from different countries, let's talk about coq au vin. This French dish that's pretty much just chicken, wine, and every root vegetable you could consider fine is actually inexpensive despite hailing from the land of the French. See, whole chickens hadn't gone through the apocalyptic plague we know as post-COVID inflation. Back then, you actually could afford to get a chicken off of your minimum wage, part-time salary. Isn't that insane? Still, I came here to show you different sides of our culinary history, not reminisce about happier times. Speaking of history, the West and East Coasts had different interpretations of this dish. In San Francisco and California in specific, there was a bustling community of French immigrants that had pretty much settled down wonderfully there. Thanks to that, coq au vin was something that spread like wildfire both among the locals and the French restaurants. There was a demand for it like never before. When slow cookers eventually came around and it made cooking this dish 10 times easier, that demand only skyrocketed. Plus, table wine was really cheap. It was just $1 or $3. Can you imagine that? These are prices from just 60 years ago, by the way. It really puts things into perspective, or puts me awfully close to cheap table wine myself. In the 1960s, if you went for duck à l'orange, it would run you around 40 to 90 cents, and that would heavily depend on the level of sophistication you could expect from the place you were going to. The orange juice here really wasn't anything, almost a non-factor really. The sauce, therefore, was pretty expensive. It was something that adventurous and daring home cooks tried to incorporate into their home menus, but it was something that was best left to restaurants and French chefs who really knew how to do it well. That is, until Julia Child made these dishes super accessible with all of her work as a television star. Northeast California and Chicago were cities with all kinds of populations of French popular. Duck wasn't really the most popular ingredient, at least not like it is now. This dish was one of the few ones that really popularized the potential duck had as a high-class food, but it was still not what you would call gourmet food or fine dining. The rick and savoriness of the duck meat coupled with the crispiness of the duck skin was really something to behold, though. Plus, all the aromatics like shallots and garlic were to die for. It was something that you would see in fine dining places and restaurants in California, but those were few and far between, and they were handled by some very top-of-the-line chefs. Duck wasn't really an everyday meat. Of course, even if inflation didn't happen, since it's just more popular now, it would still be some decently pricey game. But around the 60s, it was something most middle-class families could afford to save up for if they tried. Have you ever wondered how we got to a point where mushrooms became as popular as they are? Stuffed mushrooms, in particular, were the apple of most people's eyes. A packet of white button mushrooms would run you about 30 cents and keep you satisfied and full for the rest of the evening. The fillings were dirt cheap and probably things you already had on hand in your pantry, too. Who doesn't have some breadcrumbs, sausage, basic herbs, and garlic laying around? Plus, mushrooms were largely free for a lot of people. Curious how? During the Depression, people really picked a few survival skills up. One of those happened to be foraging in the wild for fruit and other edible things in the wilderness. People found out that mushrooms were actually one of the greatest gifts nature ever gave us, and they got hooked. Bad. Like, really bad. Mushrooms were seen as an incredibly versatile ingredient. What couldn't you do with these babies? Throw them on pizza, put them in your soup, smash them between a burger, stir-fry them, roast them, serve them at a cocktail party, or just eat them as they are, or put them in a stew. Do you see where I'm going with this? You can't, because I'm going literally everywhere you can imagine. That's how much you can do with just a simple serving of stuffed mushrooms. French versions were often a lot more buttery, while Italian versions were a lot more prone to being filled with garlic. Either way, what you could say for sure in your life was that this is a dish you really wouldn't regret waiting around for. I'm about to tell you something you never saw coming. See, the funny thing about crab cakes and crab in general is that it actually used to be dirt cheap. Yes, I know the first thing in your head was that how could something like crab meat make its way onto a list for food that would give away the fact your bank is hurting a little? Crab is something people save up for when they want a special occasion, or they have someone special to spend on. It's not something you look at as a snack, meal, or just a casual lunch to go out for, and I think that's the narrative most of us have grown up with. Crab cakes would use mixes of fresh crab, breadcrumbs, and eggs, which would make it a really simple dish all around. The cheapness of crabs couldn't be underestimated, as they were actually around just 35 to 60 cents live weight back then. This was something that came with a catch, though, which I think some of you may have seen coming. See, fresh crab meat would go for that cost, but that was only in coastal areas where crabs were abundant. A reason for the increase in price hikes for crabs is because overfishing also damages their numbers throughout the years, and that overfishing started and sowed its seeds in times like these. Outside of these fishing-reliant areas, fresh crab was still a luxury, one that could easily put you short of a couple of dollars. Crab cakes were something that seafood restaurants and places relied on thoroughly, but it was the Mid-Atlantic where crab cake culture really shined, both with low-key casual and affordable variants and upscale luxurious crab cake-based dishes. Beef bourguignon in the 1960s in America was something that was a lot more affordable than you would originally think. See, the way beef developed, it was becoming too popular and common for the government to not do something about the price. It settled around 50 to 80 cents a pound, making it a pretty cost-effective dish for what it was worth. The rest, you just needed a couple of dollars for, vegetables and table wine included. French influences like Julia Child and her book, Mastering the Art of French Cooking, a 1961 classic, made beef bourguignon something that home cooks could finally begin trying in real life. See, while beef was getting more affordable, it wasn't exactly something people could ever experiment with. If your idea went wrong, you just wasted some beef. Or worse, you wasted a pound of it. The vegetables and wine were really replicable, but a lot of people couldn't stand wasting beef, especially since not everyone lived near butcher shops. Anyway, now that we have that out of the way, let's talk about some areas where this dish thrived. So, whether it's Connecticut or Detroit, Chicago, or New York, you'll find lots of places in history cashing in on the trend of beef bourguignon. This, after all, was where it made its name. Even in places like Minneapolis and Massachusetts, French influence had people by a chokehold. The savoriness and tanginess from the red wine reduction was something that drew more and more customers to restaurants every day. The tightly sealed in and dense flavor from the extensive braising made this a standout dish, one to remember, and definitely one to tell your friends about. Cornish game hens were a pretty forgettable moment in American history, to be honest. I mean, no wonder they are on this list after all. So, Cornish game hens were something that were a tiny bit more costly than chicken, but still relatively affordable. The minimum price for a game hen would be around 80 cents, with most places easily coming to or exceeding $1. These were also sold frozen, which was really a massive draw for people to start buying these. See, before, you had to pretty much take the entire bird home and find a way to use it unless you were okay with wasting precious meat. These individual frozen servings meant that people could pick and choose the amount of meat they actually wanted to buy. This was actually something of a fine dining moment too for places like Los Angeles and San Francisco, although it was something that went for a good price in most upscale restaurants, but still it didn't have a lot of star power. The flavors were soft and mild, and you had to really chew to get a sense for what you were having. It didn't last long beyond the 60s, and I get it. This decade is full of things to talk about, seriously. So the next list of items on the list is something that's pretty much firmly within the reach of an average middle-class budget. We're going to start off with chicken Kiev, which is essentially just these boneless and skinless chicken breasts. They weren't really so common in the 60s, but the idea here was that since whole chickens were decently cheaper, like around 30 cents a pound, home cooks would pretty much just debone them on their own. Nowadays, we're quite used to getting our meals deboned for us. Plus, eventually, frozen chicken Kiev that was pre-made became something that was available in supermarkets. This was part of the new wave of convenient gourmet options that basically meant high-class dishes that before were either something locked behind a skill barrier or financial incapability were now things everyone could enjoy. It was something you'd see in a lot of Russian and Ukrainian restaurants, but it was also something you'd see a lot in Eastern European communities too. Fruit gelatin salad with cream cheese was something that was one of the most popular desserts back then in the 1960s. Jell-O cheap was cheap, really cheap, and it was around 10 to 15 cents per box. The canned fruit here was also wildly inexpensive and something you could find just about anywhere in the American states, really. Now, the most common toppings for fruit gelatin salads were whipped cream, some marshmallows, or cottage cream cheese. This was something that the American suburbia most of all loved more than anyone else. Potlucks, cocktail parties, and a lot more would serve these as regularly as they could. The salad was sweet, it was fruity, it was filled with all kinds of good vitamins and health benefits, and it was something that would get your nagging parents off of your back. Now you could call them and show them that you actually were taking your gut health seriously. As far as the flavor went for this dish, it really could have been anything depending on the kind of fruits you were using. Most people would typically just use pantry staples that they always have worked with and have lying around. It made things easier that way and gave them a lot of familiar options to experiment with before they found out what kind of Jell-O worked best for them. Cheese balls with crackers were some of the most affordable things you could buy as a middle-class family in the 1960s. They were pretty much just for 50 to 55 cents, and Triscuits and Ritz were some brands that no household could really live without. These were pretty much the dominant cracker brands in the country, and this was a dish that was enjoyed essentially all throughout the nation. Especially in places like California and New York, where TV culture was fast approaching and people were more and more inclined towards easy-to-handle, prepare, and eat dishes like this. Plus, who could contest how good of a comfort food this was? It was super convenient on all fronts. It had cheese and it had a crunchy kick thanks to the crackers. I don't know about you, but to me, that's pretty much as American as it gets, really. So pickled herring was affordable, and it cost pretty much just chump change for most people. It was one of the cheapest sources of protein, but here's where it really shined. The thing about pickled herring was that it was widely available in just about every area of America, thanks to the fact that it was always sold in jars and cans. I mean, you could take it fresh if you wanted to pickle at home, but that would just be getting yourself into a Sorry, I'll stop. Really, I know you guys have had to put up with more than a few bad puns lately. What you wouldn't have to put up with in the 60s was a bad snack option, because if you had any sense, you would pickled herring was a must-have in your pantry. Homes in Wisconsin, Minnesota, Michigan, and more states that were touched by Scandinavian and German culture, thanks either to the slowly developing effects of globalization or thanks to the immigrant populations present in the areas, would always make sure to have some herring lying around. One more thing that you would be a fool if you didn't include in your pantry was homemade bread rolls. See, the thing about those survival tricks that people picked up during the Depression was that old habits die pretty hard, especially when they save as much money as these were. Lots of people, even ones who had never even caught a whiff of an oven, began to at least learn how to make their own bread at home during the Depression thanks to how cost-effective it was. I mean, really, how could you compete with it? All you needed back then were leavening and shortening agents, some flour and yeast, and while that was still hard to get, it made people that much more skilled at making do with what they had. This meant that when things did settle down and people got access to actual good ingredients they could use for making homemade bread rolls, they were fantastic at it. Store-bought bread rolls like Parker House just couldn't compete. Plus, it added this touch of care and personalization when you would bake a bread roll for someone for Thanksgiving, you know? Escargot was definitely something I'd think twice or thrice about before I would claim that it was middle-class food. Back in the 1960s, $1 or $3 actually meant something. It wasn't petty chump change like it is now. Escargot would fetch you a price of $3 or even $3.50 per dozen at fine restaurants, and that made it something people would really have to save up for. You could go to gourmet markets and visit them to get canned snails and attempt a homemade version of escargot, but you wouldn't have fresh snails, so at some point or the other it was going to fall short. Luckily, at least everything else wasn't something that would stress your budget out. You had garlic butter, parsley, and bread, and that meant that you could pretty much make this dish with the stuff you had on hand. The only real costly ingredient here was the protein. The snail-eating thing is something that was common back then. By the way, And yes, it was another thing we were trying out just because it was French. Despite that, they were actually a lot more tame in terms of flavor than you would expect. Lots of people even claimed it was much more similar to mushrooms than anything else, really. It was an experience that was in the reach of middle-class people, but definitely not comfortably or frequently. On the other hand, Bananas Foster was a dessert that was very, very cheap. Man, I can't even tell you how many kids would die for this. It would be a non-stop pity party of how nothing good ever happened to them and how they really, really want a Banana Foster. They'd do the dishes, they'd promise to do all the chores, get their homework done by 7, eat some broccoli, not go out, get in bed by 9, and just be the spitting image of a model child, all for a serving of Foster. Why was it so good? Well, you tell me what happens when you put butter, brown sugar, vanilla ice cream, and more cinnamon than is probably safe for a kid or anyone really in one place. Now, of course, Bananas Foster does involve rum, and when serving it to children, that was an aspect of the dish people chose to exclude. But when the dinner table was above 18, oh boy, both bananas and bottles of rum would finish, and that was something you could come to expect like clockwork. This was actually something that was made in Brennan's restaurant in New Orleans around 1951, but it didn't get as popular as it is in this description until later on into the 60s, especially in highly metropolitan areas. Cobb salad, on the other hand, was America's attempt at finally trying to eat healthy while being on a budget. Lettuce, eggs, tomatoes, and cheese were things that were so widely available that it was a wonder if someone even had to go out shopping for this list of ingredients. People were also trying their hardest to cut down on their meat consumption, but that just wasn't happening as ideally as vegetarians and health nuts had hoped for. Nobody could escape the call of bacon, and Cobb salad wasn't an exception. Still, it's not like people had no impulse control. They would throw in chicken and turkey in there for the sake of having some good protein. It wasn't something you would just make at your home. You could even go to steakhouses and local diners for this. It was a dish that was perfect for casual dining. Also, by the 60s, lots of people were returning to the workforce, and for the first time, that also included droves of women. Cobb salad became synonymous with ladies who lunch and was seen as a casual mid-shift option to go for. Swedish meatballs were affordable, easy to make, and really just the perfect thing for entertaining a crowd. They became popular as a part of party culture, which was something that the 70s were known for, but it was something that had been bubbling well before that, in the 60s. Also, canned and powdered mixes of gravy were something that made the meatball preparation process infinitely easier. Ground beef here was also costing around 50 cents a pound, or at best 70, and pantry regulars like allspice and nutmeg or eggs were really common ingredients. Overall, it wasn't hard to make this dish, but it was hard to make it again and again. The demand for these meatballs was crazy. The simple truth is that Americans were bored of what they were eating. They had all the meatloafs and meatballs you could think of, and if they were going to have it again, they wanted it in a new and refreshing way. The answer to this dilemma was to take other cultures' ideas on meatballs, and that's how we got here. Pigs in a blanket are like that one friend that can just fit into any crowd. They were hot dogs that were really cheap, like just about 30 to 40 cents per pound. The biscuit dough, which was usually just Pillsbury, made the entire preparation process a non-factor because you could really just do whatever it is you wanted, since it was so easy now that there were ready-made variants of dough out there. It was something that dominated homes and neighborhoods, and there was a reason it was so popular with the middle class. For the actual wealthy people, it was considered a bit too unsophisticated, and for people who were working class, they couldn't afford to spend a lot of dollars on getting a sizable batch of pigs in a blanket. In the middle class, with their 3-bedroom homes, their cookouts, potlucks, and parties, this humble dish found the perfect place for itself to make a statement, and it definitely did. So, chicken cordon bleu is another funny one. It's something that is strictly middle class, but you can just tell this dish is trying to be something more. The fascination that the American population had with French and European cuisine and culture in the middle of the 60s was definitely interesting. It was a fascination that went into our cookbooks, our magazines, our media and movies, our dinners and our parties, and our restaurants. So you have to think, how did it really get this far? Well, again, it's kind of what I said before. Americans got tired of the typical, the regular, the mundane. They didn't want the same Monday to Friday menu they were used to, both at their regular joints and at home. They wanted fresh new flavors. Why do you think out of all the things that got popular and ended up being nation-swooping trends, fusion food and hybrid experimentations were the ones that took the cake? It's because more than anything, after a first half of the century that put them through the ringer and a diet that hadn't changed in over a century, people just wanted something new. Chicken cordon bleu was a fresh and interesting new way of having chicken breasts. It was cheap, affordable, and it came in frozen packets, which made it all the more convenient. And don't let anyone ever tell you we didn't get inspired by the French either. Crepes Suzette is yet another example of how their ideas with cooking spread to all facets of our menus and culture. Flour, eggs, milk, and sugar are all ingredients any American home chef would be familiar with. And it's not like oranges were any new flavors for people. I mean, we've had citrus dishes for centuries. What was new to a lot of people in and out of restaurants was a French technique known as flambé. This was basically something that required a lot of patience, delicate skill, precision, and a lot of Grand Marnier. But the end result was worth it. Thanks to that little skill barrier, though, it became something that was not the go-to for a lot of home chefs, but something that thrived in French restaurants that prided themselves on bringing you the authentic flavors of France in the comfort of America. These thin and delicate crepes were drenched in a citrusy and butter-heavy sauce, and they were quite the trend. Angel food cake was honestly a lot less complicated. You didn't have to do any fancy wine-based fire bending with the pan here. You just needed egg whites, cake flour, sugar, and vanilla, and a Betty Crocker mix that you knew you could rely on. Nationwide, this was a dish that would be perfect for homemade desserts, birthdays, little ventures into making some money off of your baking, and more. They were particularly popular in diet-conscious neighborhoods, which typically existed in urban hubs because those were the only places where people had the options and accessibility to actually fine-tune their diet, as well as the budget, so think California and New York. This was a really light and airy cake that had just the most subtle amount of vanilla, and that made it enchanting for a lot of people. You couldn't beat how homey and comforting this was, and also, it just looked heavenly, which is why it got the name angel cake. Eggplant parmesans were these really cheap summer trends that would just be around 40 cents per pound, but were wonderful ways of having eggplants. In Italian-American communities, especially in places like New Jersey and Chicago, these were so common because eggplants had always been a thing there, and they only increased after the events of the first half of the 20th century. Eggplants were easy to grow in those backyard gardens people had during the Depression, and Italian-Americans lent whatever knowledge they had of how to cook one as much as they could. It meant that everyone's culinary horizons expanded for the better, really. The taste here was phenomenal. You had these crispy layers of breaded eggplant that had completely soaked up the tomato sauce and were enveloped in decadent melted cheese. The sides of pasta or ziti were wonderful, and the stuffing of garlic gave it the perfect kick it needed. All in all, this was a fantastic way of having an eggplant. Remember how I was talking about the way people just had enough of the typical meatball marathon? Well, grape jelly meatballs were a divisive one that tried to tackle that issue. Some people thought these fusion food, or as some would affectionately call them, frankenfoods, were going a bit too far, and others thought that we hadn't really started going far enough. There were obvious benefits to them, ones that couldn't really be debated, but the taste wasn't all there for a lot of people. Now, the benefits. These things were really affordable, so they were perfect for large-size gatherings. They were also really novel, and the combination of sweet grape jelly with those often really gamey-tasting meatballs was something that lots of Americans initially thought was fancy. It also came into finger foods, which meant that it was perfect for all kinds of parties. You'd see a lot of this dish in the Midwest and South, particularly in California and New York, which was really where the trend of party food first erupted. Duck à l'orange marries the deep, rich flavors of duck with the sharp zestiness of oranges, a culinary duo dating back to the Renaissance, though it gained popularity in Paris in the early 20th century. This classic dish features roasted duck with a skin crisped to perfection, paired with a sweet and tangy orange sauce made from fresh orange juice, sugar, vinegar, and sometimes Grand Marnier. To perfect duck à l'orange, meticulous attention is paid to rendering the fat from the duck skin, ensuring it crisps up beautifully to contrast with the juicy meat beneath. The sauce is usually prepared separately and reduced to a luscious syrup, then drizzled over the duck just before serving to preserve its bold, vibrant flavors. This dish masterfully balances the rich, natural fat of the duck with the bright, acidic notes of citrus, showcasing refined culinary techniques. Known affectionately as a hot dish in the Midwest, the tater-tot casserole is a quintessential example of American comfort food. It was popularized in the 1950s as a convenient way to create a hearty meal with minimal ingredients. The casserole consists of a base layer of ground beef seasoned with onions, a binder of condensed mushroom or chicken soup, a layer of canned or frozen vegetables, and a top layer of crisp tater tots. As it bakes, the tater tots form a golden crust, providing a crunchy contrast to the creamy, savory mixture below. The casserole's popularity also demonstrates the post-war American innovation in using processed and prepackaged foods to save time in the kitchen, a trend that mirrored the nation's growing emphasis on convenience and efficiency in everyday life. Popularized in American households in the early 1900s, so tender Swiss steak involves a method of preparing a tougher cut of beef, such as round steak, by pounding or rolling before cooking. This tenderizing process, known as Swissing, lends the dish its name, although it has no connection to Switzerland. Traditionally, the steak is browned, then slow-cooked in a rich tomato and onion gravy, allowing the flavors to meld and the meat to become fork tender. This dish showcased an economical approach to cooking during the Great Depression, providing a delicious solution for less desirable cuts of meat. The preparation of Swiss steak often became a Sunday dinner ritual, where its slow cooking could proceed alongside family activities, making it an integral part of the family dining experience. Corned beef and cabbage offers a cultural touchstone in school menus, particularly around St. Patrick's Day, providing a festive and educational meal. This dish involves slow-cooking corned beef in a spiced brine until it is tender, then adding chunks of cabbage that cook until just tender, absorbing the rich flavors of the meat. Corned beef and cabbage is not only a nod to cultural heritage, but also a balanced meal, offering a good mix of protein and vitamins from the cabbage. In school settings, this dish serves as a special menu item that can educate students about international cuisine while providing a nutritious and flavorful meal. Its preparation, while requiring more time than some other dishes, is relatively straightforward and can be executed with basic kitchen equipment, making it feasible for special occasions in schools. Scrapple was the typical everything but the oink dish. This Pennsylvania Dutch classic was made from pork scraps. Yes, that includes everything from the snout to the tail, combined with cornmeal and flour, then formed into a loaf. It is also known by the Pennsylvania Dutch name panhas. Scrapples and panhas were commonly considered ethnic foods of the Pennsylvania Dutch, including the Mennonites and Amish. Scraps of meat left over from butchering not otherwise used or sold were made into scrapples to avoid waste. It's like your grandma's meatloaf with a whole lot more mystery meat. Scrapple had a love it or hate it reputation. For some, it was a comfort food that reminded them of home. For others, it was a mysterious meat block they'd rather avoid. It's definitely an acquired taste, one that has not quite made it to mainstream breakfast menus. And don't even get me started on the texture. I'll leave a little to your imagination. Beef bourguignon is a cornerstone from Burgundy, involving marinated and slow-cooked beef chunks, typically tougher cuts like chuck, bathed in red wine, usually Burgundy, to tenderize the meat over several hours. This hearty stew is fortified with onions, garlic, and carrots, and enhanced with sautéed mushrooms and crisp lardons. Historically, this method likely evolved as a means to tenderize and enrich less desirable cuts of meat. The stew develops a rich, deep umami flavor from the Maillard reaction, which occurs as the beef browns, and the complex flavors intensify as the wine slowly melds with the herbs and vegetables. The slow cooking process not only enriches the stew's flavor, but also fills the kitchen with an inviting aromatic warmth, making beef bourguignon synonymous with comforting, rich French culinary tradition. Bacon cheddar potato skins epitomize the fusion of simple ingredients into a beloved American bar snack. This dish, which emerged prominently in the culinary scene during the 1970s, utilizes russet potatoes known for their thick skin and starchy content, making them ideal for baking and frying. The preparation involves halving the potatoes and scooping out most of the flesh, leaving about a 1/4 inch attached to the skin. The hollowed-out skins are then baked or deep-fried until crisp and golden. Once crisped, these skins are stuffed with generous amounts of sharp cheddar cheese and crisp crumbled bacon. The cheddar is chosen for its melting properties and strong flavor, which pairs well with the smoky bacon. The filled skins are then returned to the oven until the cheese melts into a bubbly, golden pool. The dish's widespread popularity helped elevate the status of the potato from a simple side dish to a featured player in the culinary world. Here we go! Pizza first appeared in American school cafeterias in the late 1950s, tailor-made to appeal to children with rich, savory toppings such as pepperoni and sausage. Originally from Italy, this beloved dish was transformed in the U.S. with hearty, high-fat ingredients, providing a quick and satisfying student meal. Assembled with hand-stretched dough, slathered with tomato sauce, and layered with mozzarella and meats, the pizza is baked at high temperatures. This process melds the flavors and textures into a delicious offering with a crispy crust and a melted cheese topping. The combination of carbohydrates, protein, and fats met the nutritional needs of busy school environments efficiently, making pizza a consistent hit among students who relished the comforting taste and filling nature of each slice. Cracklins, on the other hand, I can get behind. They're basically pork rinds, but with a fancy name. Finally, a normal, delicious meal that doesn't make your nose wrinkle. Cracklins were essentially the popcorn of the pork world. These crispy, crunchy bits were made from frying pieces of pork fat and skin until they puff up and become irresistible little nuggets. In the days when every part of the pig was used, cracklins were a way to make a snack out of what would otherwise be discarded. But here's the catch. These didn't really have a lot of benefits when you ate them. Yeah, nothing really screams healthy about eating deep-fried pieces of pork. Think of them as the porky cousin of potato chips. These days, you're more likely to find them in specialty southern stores than on your local supermarket shelf. Cracklins may not be the healthiest choice, but they're a tasty reminder of a time when people knew how to make the most of what they had. Cornish game hen, a petite and elegant poultry choice, typically weighs no more than 2 pounds and is ideal for serving as an individual portion, making it perfect for an upscale dinner. These hens are usually roasted whole, seasoned lightly with herbs like thyme and sage, and basted in butter to achieve a crispy, golden skin while keeping the meat juicy and tender. The cavity may be stuffed with a flavorful blend of breadcrumbs, chopped vegetables, and herbs, enriching the meat during cooking. The cooking process often involves high-temperature roasting to crisp the skin, followed by a resting period before serving to ensure the meat remains moist. Serving Cornish game hens on a bed of wild rice or alongside roasted vegetables allows their delicate flavors to shine, making them a favored choice for intimate dining and special occasions due to their ideal portion size and visually appealing presentation. Anchovy butter steaks are a bold culinary creation, blending the umami depth of anchovies with the rich flavors of succulent steak. Popularized in mid-20th century America, this dish caters to those who appreciate daring flavor combinations. The steak, usually a marbled ribeye or sirloin, is seasoned simply and seared to perfection. The anchovy butter, a mixture of softened butter, finely minced anchovies, garlic, and occasionally a hint of lemon zest or herbs, is then slathered over the hot steak. This compound butter melts into the steak, infusing it with salty and intense anchovy flavors that enhance the natural beefiness. Here, the assertive flavor of anchovies perfectly accentuates the steak's luxurious richness, crafting a dining experience rich in both taste and elegance. Cowboy stew is a robust concoction traditionally associated with the outdoor cooking of American cattle herders. This dish typically includes a base of ground beef or other meat, combined with a hearty blend of potatoes, onions, beans, corn, and tomatoes, stewed in a richly seasoned broth. The stew's origins are rooted in the practical needs of cowboys during cattle drives across the American West, requiring meals that could be cooked in a single pot over an open fire. Cowboy stew's durability and popularity among outdoor workers underscore its role in the folklore of the American frontier. The recipe's evolution over time incorporated local and available ingredients, showcasing the stew's flexibility and the improvisational skills of those who made it. Boiled hot dogs have been a long-standing favorite in American school cafeterias, known for their simple, tasty, and quick preparation. Made from a blend of beef and pork, these hot dogs are seasoned and boiled, served in a soft bun with a variety of condiments like ketchup, mustard, and relish. This cooking method is particularly effective in school environments as it allows for hot dogs to be prepared en masse and kept warm. The simplicity of boiled hot dogs makes them a reliable choice for school cafeterias, where the lunch period is often brief and the demand for quick service is high. Additionally, the familiarity and ease of customization of hot dogs meet diverse student preferences, making them a popular and comforting choice. This meal option not only satisfies hunger swiftly, but also aligns with the logistical needs of serving hundreds of students. Hoppin' John is a Southern classic made with black-eyed peas, rice, and pork, often flavored with onions, garlic, and spices. This dish was traditionally eaten on New Year's Day for good luck and prosperity, with the peas representing coins and the greens often served alongside representing dollars. Some recipes use ham hock, fatback, country sausage, or smoked turkey parts instead of bacon. A few use green peppers or vinegar and spices. Hoppin' John was a hearty, comforting dish that's perfect for feeding a crowd on a budget. It was a one-pot wonder that brings together simple ingredients in a delicious way. However, despite its tasty credentials, Hoppin' John hasn't quite made it to the top of the culinary charts. It's a dish steeped in tradition, but not one that has a big presence in today's trendy food scene. That said, it's still a beloved dish in the South and a tasty way to start the new year. Lamb shanks epitomize the rich flavors and tender textures celebrated in Mediterranean and Middle Eastern cuisines. Prized for their gelatin-rich connective tissue, lamb shanks transform through slow cooking into melt-in-your-mouth tenderness. The preparation starts with searing the shanks to a golden brown, locking in flavors through caramelization, then braising them slowly in a mix of wine, stock, and aromatics like onions, carrots, and celery, enhanced with herbs such as rosemary and thyme. This method not only tenderizes the meat, but also infuses it with a robust blend of flavors. Typically, the dish is finished with a sprinkle of gremolata, adding a fresh burst of lemon, garlic, and parsley that cuts through the richness. The braised liquid serves as a deeply flavored sauce, reduced to intensify its taste, complementing the richness of the lamb with a perfect balance of flavors. This festive dish, emerging in American culinary circles in the mid-20th century, cleverly combines the contrasting flavors of sweet pineapple and savory cheese. The pineapple cheese ball consists of cream cheese enriched with finely chopped pineapple, green peppers, and sometimes added ham or pecans, rolled into a ball and coated with crushed nuts. The dish captures the post-war American enthusiasm for novel flavor combinations and party foods that could double as conversation starters. Its popularity at social events can be attributed to both its taste and its decorative appearance, which made it a visually appealing centerpiece on buffet tables. The pineapple cheese ball also illustrates the period's innovation in using canned ingredients, which were celebrated for their convenience and year-round availability, allowing hosts to whip up impressive treats without extensive preparation. Bread pudding offers a creative solution for utilizing leftover bread in school cafeterias, turning potential waste into a delectable dessert. This dish is typically prepared by cubing stale bread and soaking it in a mixture made from milk, eggs, sugar, and vanilla, which infuses it with rich flavors and a soft texture. Often, additions like raisins or cinnamon are mixed in to enhance the taste and appeal of the pudding. Bread pudding is then baked until the top layer caramelizes into a golden crust, contrasting beautifully with the creamy, custard-like interior. This dessert is particularly popular in schools due to its economical benefits and the comfort it provides to students. The warm, sweet nature of bread pudding makes it a welcomed treat, encouraging students to partake in school meals while providing them with a source of energy. Potted meat is a canned meat product that was a staple in many households during tough times. Made from a mix of meats, including beef and pork, it's ground into a paste and seasoned. It's often used as a spread on crackers or bread, making it a quick and easy snack or meal component. Potted meat has a long shelf life, which makes it perfect for stocking pantries during uncertain times. It's not exactly gourmet fare, but it got the job done. However, in today's era of fresh whole foods, potted meat has fallen out of favor. It's the kind of thing you might find in a survival kit or on a camping trip, but not something you'd serve at a dinner party. Still, for those who grew up with it, potted meat holds a special place in the pantry of memories. Chicken marengo holds a storied place in culinary history, famously prepared for Napoleon after the Battle of Marengo. This dish encapsulates the essence of victorious improvisation, using local ingredients available at the time. Chicken marengo starts with chicken pieces sautéed in olive oil, braised with onions, garlic, and tomatoes, enriched by a splash of white wine that deglazes the pan, forming a robust sauce. Later additions often include mushrooms, and traditionally, it was garnished with fried eggs and crayfish, though these are less common today. The slow simmering melds all the flavors beautifully, allowing the tomatoes to break down and create a rich, savory sauce that complements the tender chicken perfectly. This dish exemplifies French provincial cooking, utilizing straightforward techniques and local ingredients to produce a dish rich in history and flavor. The taco salad, which emerged as a popular dish in American cuisine in the 1960s, is a notable example of Tex-Mex culinary fusion. The typical taco salad starts with a crunchy tortilla bowl filled with lettuce, seasoned ground beef, shredded cheese, diced tomatoes, and black olives, finished with dollops of sour cream and salsa. This dish illustrates the adaptability of Mexican cuisine to American tastes, incorporating more cheese and sour cream than traditional Mexican salads. Taco salads became particularly popular in the 1980s, often served at gatherings and potlucks due to their customizable nature, which allowed guests to tailor the toppings to their preferences. Taco salad's popularity also coincided with a growing interest in more casual dining experiences at home, where families and friends could interact in more relaxed settings. Zucchini panzanella salad, an adaptation of the classic Italian bread salad, began to capture the attention of American food enthusiasts in the late 1990s. This version introduces zucchini and robust Italian bread, grilled to perfection, tossed with ripe tomatoes, red onions, and fresh basil, all dressed in a balsamic vinaigrette. The innovation lies not just in the ingredients, but in the method of preparation that emphasizes the grilling of vegetables and bread to enhance their flavors before combining them with the dressing. This approach not only maximizes the textures and flavors, but also aligns with a growing preference for grilled foods. The salad's popularity grew as it became synonymous with summer dining, often featured in outdoor meals and barbecues where a light yet satisfying dish was required. Rice pudding is a classic dessert that finds its way into school menus, beloved for its simplicity and comforting qualities. Made by slowly simmering rice in milk until the grains are tender, this pudding is sweetened with sugar and typically flavored with vanilla, cinnamon, or even a bit of citrus zest to elevate the dish's aroma and taste. The slow cooking process allows the rice to absorb the flavors and the milk to thicken into a rich, creamy texture. Rice pudding can be served either warm or chilled, making it a versatile option for different seasons and preferences. Its gentle, creamy texture and the mild, sweet flavor profile make it an excellent choice for a school dessert, offering a source of carbohydrate and calcium. Pork belly with cracklings is celebrated for its luxurious flavors and contrasting textures derived from the rich layers of meat and fat found in pork belly. The preparation process starts with scoring the skin and massaging it with a blend of salt, pepper, and aromatic herbs or spices to infuse flavor. The meat is slow roasted at a low temperature to render the fat and tenderize the meat, followed by a blast of high heat to crisp the skin into cracklings. This approach ensures the pork belly stays succulent, while the outer skin turns deliciously crisp. Often served sliced thickly and accompanied by applesauce or a cider reduction, this dish perfectly pairs the pork's richness with a touch of sweet acidity. The allure of pork belly with cracklings lies in the depth of its flavors and the satisfying interplay of tender meat with crispy skin. Crab Louis salad, reputed to have originated on the West Coast in the early 1900s, is a luxurious ensemble of crab meat, hard-boiled eggs, tomatoes, asparagus, and iceberg lettuce, dressed in a creamy sauce made from mayonnaise and chili sauce. This salad is often linked with the dining rooms of San Francisco and Seattle, where it was served as a gourmet item in the early 20th century. The inclusion of Dungeness crab, a regional specialty, underscores the salad's connection to the Pacific Northwest's seafood bounty. Its enduring popularity was fueled by the dish's association with elegance and affluence, making it a prized feature on hotel and restaurant menus. Additionally, Crab Louis salad is a testament to the American culinary tradition of adopting and adapting regional ingredients to create dishes that become part of the national gastronomy. Creamed corn is prepared by cooking sweet corn kernels until tender and then mixing them with a creamy sauce made from milk, butter, and a thickener such as flour or cornstarch. Seasoned lightly, usually with salt and pepper, and sometimes enhanced with sugar to bring out the natural sweetness of the corn, creamed corn is a favorite in school cafeterias for its smooth, slightly sweet flavor profile that appeals to young eaters. This dish serves as an excellent way to incorporate vegetables into students' diets in a form that is generally more palatable to children who may be picky eaters. Its popularity in schools is reinforced by its nutritional content, offering a good source of fiber and vitamins while being gentle on young stomachs. Creamed corn's ability to be kept warm in serving trays without losing texture or flavor makes it particularly suited to the cafeteria setting, where dishes need to remain appealing throughout the serving period. Veal Prince Orloff is a lavish dish that captures the essence of French-Russian culinary elegance, named after the Russian diplomat Prince Orloff, who resided in France during the 19th century. Created by the renowned French chef Urbain Dubois, it aims to impress with its sophisticated layering and flavors. The dish features slices of roasted veal loin alternated with layers of sautéed mushrooms and onions, with slices of Mornay sauce-enriched eggplant interspersed throughout. It is then crowned with more Mornay sauce, baked until bubbly and golden. This intricate preparation not only showcases the delicate flavors of veal, but also the creamy texture of the Mornay sauce, making it a dish that stands out in both taste and presentation. Lentil soup's place in the American culinary landscape was solidified as nutritional awareness rose in the 1980s. This humble soup, made from lentils simmered with carrots, celery, onions, and a medley of spices, became prized not only for its comforting warmth, but also for its nutritional powerhouse status, offering high protein and fiber content. The simplicity of its ingredients and the one-pot cooking method appealed to those seeking wholesome, minimal-effort meals. Additionally, lentil soup's adaptability to incorporate various spices and additional vegetables allowed it to remain a favorite among those experimenting with global cuisines, easily taking on flavors from different culinary traditions. Macaroni and cheese loaf emerged as a popular variation in the 1970s when schools sought to diversify their menu offerings while still providing comforting and familiar foods. This dish takes the beloved elements of traditional macaroni and cheese, a mixture of cooked macaroni and creamy cheese sauce, and adds eggs and breadcrumbs to bind the ingredients into a solid loaf that can be easily sliced. The loaf is baked until the exterior is slightly crispy and golden, offering a textural contrast to the soft, cheesy interior. This format not only makes serving more efficient, but also reduces food waste, as the loaf can be cut into precise portions. Peach chicken became popular in the 1970s, aligning with an American trend of integrating fruit into savory dishes. This recipe combines the natural sweetness of peaches with the savory depth of chicken, creating a delightful contrast. Browned chicken pieces are simmered with fresh or canned peaches, with ginger and cinnamon adding a layer of spice that complements the sweetness. Additional peach preserves or syrup can be added to enrich the sauce, deepening the dish's flavor profile. A splash of bourbon or brandy is sometimes included, lending a smoky nuance. The sauce is typically thickened with a cornstarch slurry, producing a glossy finish that adheres beautifully to the chicken. This dish illustrates the versatility of chicken as a canvas for flavor, adeptly marrying the sweet with the savory in a uniquely American culinary experiment. Introduced during the late 1980s as American interest in Asian cuisine surged, pineapple ginger chicken stir-fry represents a fusion that captures the essence of both American and Asian tastes. This dish combines juicy, sautéed chicken pieces with sharp ginger and sweet pineapple, delivering a dish that bursts with contrasting flavors. The addition of bell peppers and onions adds a crunchy texture, enhancing the overall sensory experience. The use of ginger, not only for its flavor but also for its reputed health benefits, coincided with a growing American fascination with healthier eating options. It exemplifies how global ingredients were becoming more accessible in local supermarkets, enabling home cooks to explore international recipes with ease. Potato patties are a creative and delicious way to utilize leftover ingredients, transforming simple mashed potatoes into something special. Mixed with eggs and a little flour to help bind them, seasoned with salt, pepper, and often additional flavors like finely chopped onions or herbs, these patties are then shaped into rounds. The next step involves pan-frying them in a little oil until each side turns golden brown and crispy, creating a delightful contrast to the soft interior. Each batch can be made efficiently, serving many students without requiring extensive cooking time. They can be featured as a vegetarian entree or a side dish, complemented by various dips and sauces that enhance their flavor. This versatility makes them an invaluable addition to the school menu. Aspic glazed meatloaf is an example of mid-20th century American cuisine that combines traditional meatloaf with a gelatinous aspic topping. This dish reflects a period when aspic, a savory jelly made from clarified meat broths and gelatin, was popular in the culinary world for its ability to preserve and enhance the presentation of dishes. The meatloaf itself is typically prepared with ground meat, often a mix of beef, pork, and veal, seasoned with onions, garlic, breadcrumbs, and eggs to bind the mixture. After baking, the meatloaf is cooled and then glazed with a clear aspic made from beef or chicken stock that has been reduced and mixed with gelatin until set. This glaze not only adds a glossy, appetizing finish, but also introduces a subtle, savory flavor that complements the rich meatloaf. The aspic also helps to keep the meatloaf moist and flavorful by sealing in the juices. The introduction of herbed rice pilaf into American dining rooms in the late 1980s can be seen as part of a broader trend towards incorporating refined grains into everyday meals. This dish, prepared by sautéing rice with onions and butter before simmering in chicken or vegetable broth, is enhanced with a selection of herbs such as parsley, thyme, and rosemary. The preparation of rice pilaf was often highlighted in culinary schools and cooking shows as a basic skill, illustrating the technique of infusing flavors into rice through the choice of broth and herbs. The dish's popularity was boosted by its versatility, serving as an elegant side that complemented a wide range of main dishes, from roasted meats to vegetarian entrees, making it a useful recipe in the repertoire of any aspiring home chef. Powdered milk in school cafeterias serves as a practical alternative to fresh milk, particularly valued for its extended shelf life and lower cost. This dehydrated dairy product is reconstituted by adding water. Powdered milk is often used not only as a beverage, but also as an ingredient in various recipes, from baked goods to mashed potatoes, enhancing their calcium and protein content. Although it may lack some of the flavor nuances of fresh milk, it remains an important nutritional component, offering essential nutrients such as vitamins D and A. The use of powdered milk in schools is driven by logistical advantages. It requires no refrigeration and can be stored for long periods, making it ideal for large-scale food service operations where efficiency and cost-effectiveness are priorities. Its inclusion in school meal programs ensures that students receive sufficient daily dairy intake, supporting their overall health and development within the constraints of school budgets. Potted huff is a dish made from the meat of the shin of a cow or pig, cooked and pressed into a pot with its own jelly-like juices. It's similar to head cheese but focuses on a specific part of the animal. This dish was often seasoned and served cold, sliced up with bread or pickles. Back in the day, potted hoof was a way to make use of tougher cuts of meat that needed slow cooking to become tender. It was a popular dish among working-class families in the UK and the US, providing a hearty, protein-rich meal. Nowadays, potted hoof has largely disappeared from the culinary scene, replaced by more refined meat products. It's a dish that hasn't stood the test of time, but it still offers a glimpse into the resourceful cooking of past generations. That wraps up the video on finding out which foods made you middle class in the 60s. Which food would you eat today? Comment down below and don't forget to like and subscribe.